Welcome to In the Black, the podcast that shines a light on resilience, transformation, and the power of reinvention. I'm Araceli, and each week my co host Shannon and I sit down with incredible women who face some of life's hardest challenges, from personal setbacks to societal obstacles, and have emerged on the other side stronger, driven, and ready to make a difference.
On In the Black, we celebrate these stories of strength and success, diving deep into the journeys of women who turn pain into purpose, adversity into action, and now dedicate themselves to making the world a better place in their own way. They're here to inspire, share hard-earned wisdom, and remind us all that no matter how dark things seem, life is cyclical and dawn is coming. So whether you're looking for inspiration, motivation, or just a reminder that change is always possible, this is the podcast for you. Welcome to In the Black. Today, we are speaking with Vaughn, and she has dedicated her life to fighting for women everywhere. Through her advocacy, she not only elevates the stories of survivors, but she ensures their voices are heard loud and clear. Join us as we explore her incredible journey of courage, healing, and unyielding determination to create a world where every woman can stand tall in her truth and find safety. Welcome, Vaughn. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate this.
So tell us a little about who you are, what you do, just kind of the basics of where you're at in your life right now.
Sure. I'm from Missouri and born and raised, and I've always been a writer as long as I remember. I wrote with my mother when she was writing her stories, and I would hold my notebook upside down because I didn't even know how to write yet, but I knew that's what you did. And so I've literally written my entire life. I grew up in the 80s when women were saying, we don't like the material in women's magazines. We don't care about making a better souffle and having a beach butt. And I said, well, no problem. I'll write better than that. And none of it ever got published because men at tables wanted us to have a better beach butt and make a better souffle. Took me years to figure that out. But then the internet happened, and I got really lucky that I was a local journalist right as Facebook news became a thing. And all of a sudden, I didn't have a boss to answer to, and I was able to pick the stories and decide what I wrote about. And that was the really big career changer for me. And I followed poverty, women's issues because they're so closely intertwined. And it got to where there was no way I could be a journalist and remove myself when I really wanted to help. So I've kind of always straddled the line of writing and advocacy because I do as much as I can without interfering with the story. And that's about it for me.
That is so cool to hear that. Because you don't know, you don't hear some of the things that back in the day, like this is what, some journalists like dealt with.
When I fought the city, they were trying to get me fired, trying to shut me down, and they couldn't because I had no boss and I didn't answer to anybody. And the harder they fought me, the madder I got, and the harder I made it for them. And then it became like a public spectacle where people were watching one woman take out basically an entire city of people saying, "Shut up," and I would not. So that was a lot of fun, but it was all timing of the internet that made what I've done possible. And now I'm just kind of an accepted Springfield institution and people just know I'm there. But that was how I got my big break.
So you basically went against like women and people telling you to be quiet, and you just kept persisting and doing you. That's so amazing.
Yeah, I think it's incredible what you've done for the women in Springfield. And I personally have a friend that you have helped tremendously. And I won't say her name because I think she's going to be a guest also at some point. But I think it's so powerful, the work that you've done in
I love
fighting.
when people catch me working. I love when someone, I don't even know who you're talking about. I love when someone will be like, oh, you really helped a friend of mine get on their feet and do whatever it was. And it's like, oh, great. Because like sometimes it feels like I'm just shouting into the wind. And when I hear that, it reminds me that it actually went somewhere, that something happened and something was gained from all this work. So thank you. That made my morning.
Yeah, I just knowing what you do for people is so powerful. So real quick, I just want you to take us back to a pivotal moment where you faced your own challenge and you really had to go through something difficult. What was happening in your life at that time? How did that impact you? Just kind of walk us through those details.
Um, well, something that's kind of pertinent to all the work that came after is when I was 18, I was raped. And I talk very openly about that because in the Midwest, in the Bible Belt, you're not supposed to talk about those things. And I found even people who wanted to comfort me really wanted me to shut up so we could go back to doing something more fun. And I was so young and I had no family and no support system whatsoever. And I went through, I mean, obviously that's a lot to go through, but the thing that struck with me the most, it still hits me today, is of all things, checking the mail. I dreaded checking the mail and getting letters from the police, from the lawyers, from everything related to that. And at almost 50 years old, my husband, bless his heart, checks the mail because he just knows I hate to do it. He doesn't know why, but still, seeing my name in that particular government font just drops my stomach. And I was quiet for years. I didn't tell my best friends or anyone because I'm not from Kansas City where it happened. And it was just so hard to find anyone who related, and if they did, they either didn't know how to handle that news or they just really wanted it to go away. And then I started again, the internet happened and I learned, the statistics of how many women are affected by that, and I was like, we need to know more and we need to share more. And that has kind of been the basis of my work. Before that, I was raised in a very rural, all white community where there was no diversity. You were Baptist or you were Southern Baptist, and those were your choices. And it was so wild to live in a big city and come back. But especially here in the rural areas where so many people live, their stories are absolutely hidden and they matter. So when I came back, I said, well, that's what I'm going to do. And that's kind of what I've done ever since.
I love that so much. Finding your purpose at such a young age is just incredible. And I'm sorry that it happened the way that it did. But I know that over the years, you have been a powerful force for inspiring me to do more. And I just, I'm really excited to dig into the nitty gritty of everything. So as you were going through that, you're 18 years old, you don't have family or friends here, right? And as you're going through that, what do you think the most difficult aspect was? Was it being silenced? Was it some sort of external circumstances or situations? Was it your mental health? Like, what can you just kind of walk us through what that experience was like, if that's not too personal?
No, not at all. The very hardest thing was rejoining life. I obviously lost, I was 18. I had a terrible telemarketing job, but I lost it because of poor attendance. And in the 80s, with the walk it off mentality that we had towards mental health at that time, the fact that I had no support, I felt like I was failing. I never understood at that point in my life, you're just going through what is normal for what happened to you. I was like, my God, why can't you get up? Why can't you clean your kitchen? Why can't you dress yourself? And it was because I was dying inside, but didn't know that because I'd never experienced that, nor had I read anyone's experiences like that to let me know that this was to be expected. You're going to shut yourself off from the world after something so traumatic, especially if you were alone to begin with. You're not going to be able to enjoy. I mean, telemarketing is arguing for passion, and I'm really good at that. So, I love the argument. I love the competition, and I got to where I couldn't. If someone raised their voice, I was out. And interpersonal relationships, my God, took me years to rebuild. But really, the worst part of it was feeling like a failure for going through things that were, if I had access to therapy or anything like that, would have known that that was absolutely normal and part of the healing process. Instead, I thought, something bad happened and what, you're just going to keep failing till what, till you die, you know? And I was like, okay. At 18, I was like, all right, I guess that's what I've got ahead of me. And the isolation, because then when I started to tell people there were problems, but there were months and years when I went between that, just floating. And I lost some of the best years of my life to just not understanding what was happening to me. And there were really no great resources out there then. Again, the internet did not exist. I'm that old. And I didn't really have the resources to go to the library and hunt down books or find the sources we take for granted now. Now, if you want to know something, you head off to Google and you have everything you want to know. That wasn't the case then. And I don't ever want anyone to float lost thinking that they are failing when what they're really doing is healing.
How did you discover that doing the simple things of like getting up, getting dressed, like cleaning was part of that healing? I know you didn't have access to any of that. So how were you able to find that out, those resources without internet, and how did you come out of that?
I really didn't. If it hadn't been for the internet, I'm afraid I might still be there. I met my husband, the man who would become my husband, when I was 22. So I was still really young. And I got to experience love that I did not know in my childhood in any way, and support. And he didn't quite know everything. He knew a lot of bad stuff had happened. But if we go into my childhood, I'll just say for now, my childhood was so bad that if you hear the story, you're like, no way was it that bad. And he met some of my high school friends and are like, yeah, it was that bad. And so he let me take a couple of years off of work. And then that was right when the internet came, and I was home all day with the internet in front of me. And of course, I looked at kitten butts and all that good stuff. But also, I spent a certain amount every day reading slowly about stories like mine and realizing that, oh, but it was all completely self owned because, again, we were young and poor and we didn't have access to insurance or mental health services of any kind. So it was pretty much self led education.
Are you able to talk a little bit of your childhood and, a few
Sure.
things that shaped that? Okay.
This is a huge part of my work. One of my books is called Small Sacrifices, which talks about how we've sacrificed women and children through history. But people forget about rural America. The big cities just forget that these swaths of populations exist. And growing up in the Bible Belt, we were very conditioned to be very religious, very pure. You don't talk. I was molested from ages 4 to 8, maybe 9, somewhere in there. um, I knew not to talk about it because I knew if I said anything, that all of society would agree with the person who was hurting me and not me. And I come from very toxic male relationships. So my father abused my mother. When she left, she ran for her life and she didn't contact me for almost 5 years. And part of me is really angry that she left me with the man who abused her so bad that he almost killed her. But part of me also understands she had to save her life. And so from my father, I was emotionally, psychologically, spiritually abused. He was so mad that my mom left. He didn't tell me she left. He let me think she had died. I came to that conclusion on my own and mourned a mother in third grade all by myself with no one to talk to. So I had grown up isolated, completely relied on myself for everything. And that made me who I am. And that meant when later, when I was fighting the city and all these people, uh, I didn't need outside validation. I'd never had it. I knew how to carry myself. Well, when I was 8, I'd walk up to an adult, shake their hand, and look them in the eye because I've been living on my own by then for a few years. My father left me shortly after my mom did. He dropped off groceries, and that was about it. So anyway, my childhood was very, but my main, and now I know it's escapism, but I read. Nobody got onto a kid for reading books in the 80s. So I poured through books, and the librarians knew me and let me take home way more than the limit because I read them all and they were cherished, and that's what they wanted. But that escapism also gave me this huge foundation of knowledge later. It's amazing the weird random things you read in a book, even horrible fantasy books where you're like, oh, I need a science fact. Here's one. And So I was a fountain of useless knowledge, just looking for somewhere to plug into and share that. And so I just kind of I'm lucky enough to have formed that way. But I know abuse and neglect pretty much as one can. And I work about things like I say for domestic violence, I say, don't look for black eyes. Look for the woman who wears a turtleneck in August. And when I say kids, I say, don't look for a kid who, is doing what you think. Look for a kid who's acting out, who isolates. The kid who says, don't yell at me, my parents will kill me, and mean it. They're not being dramatic. They're trying to tell you something. And we miss these signals from people who are isolated, suffering abuse, because in the country, you're so isolated that if your immediate circle fails you, you might die. I mean, like, it's not like the city where you just walk next door. Our next door was probably 3 miles away. So I had to learn to take care of myself.
The similarities in how we were raised. I had both of my parents, but just that rural America, and my dad ended up going to prison for what he did to my brothers, and it every time it gets me every time.
Well,
Uh,
we see these specials where kids in the cities have inner city programs, library programs, school programs. I graduated in a class of 22. Our school was so tiny, it had no resources. And even if it did, no one was going to interfere. In the 80s, you minded your business. And that was that. Of course, those teachers knew when I came to school wearing the same clothes 3 or 4 days in a row because no one had done laundry and I didn't even know how to brush my hair. Like, of course they knew I was neglected. No one said anything. But we see city solutions forgetting that there's huge populations of kids in the country who simply cannot even escape their home, let alone their block or their, whatever. And they have to survive with the cards that they're dealt, and that's it. There are no other cards coming.
Absolutely. I did not realize how bad my upbringing was until my escapism was reading. And in college, our social work professor made us read this book called A Child Called It.
Hmm.
And when I read that, I was like, oh, this isn't that bad. This is like basically normal life.
This is
And
summer break for us.
right. And I went back to that class and everyone was like crying about it. And they were like, I can't believe someone would do that. And I was like, it wasn't that bad. They were like, this is the second worst case of recorded child abuse in California history. And I was like, oh, well, I guess maybe I should be thinking that my upbringing was worse than what I thought, because that was the first time that I really had that revelation of the way you were raised is not okay. And it was a huge moment. Did you have a moment where, I mean, you were so young. Um, did you have a moment where you were like, this is not right? Or moments along the way where you were just like, this isn't it? Like, what is going on? This isn't right.
I accepted the dichotomy that I lived completely alone and my friends had parents who cut up their steak for them. Like that didn't seem unusual to me because when you're raised in it, it's just how it is. But when I met my husband and his family, it was just a perfectly normal, lovely family. But I realized like he had this support. Like they're like, yeah, when he was 16, we bought him a car, got him his first job. I'm like, what? And just seeing through his eyes kind of vicariously what a normal childhood was, then began to take measure. And yes, I did a talk at a library called The Reckoning, about how when you've been through abuse of this level, at some point you have to sit down and tally and weigh all that has been done to you. And that is some frightening, deep work. And if you didn't have an abusive childhood, you can do it simply with men in your life. All the men who hold their crap over all the years of your life. If you just sit down and wrestle through that, that's a bottle of wine in a whole afternoon. And I sat and I really worked through my childhood through Bart, my husband, and seeing what normal was like. And then like the way his family just brought me in because they didn't know I was weird. I learned the first thing of child abuse is you don't talk about it. You make yourself seem normal. So I held that crust for years. And then one day I wrote his mom a note and I was like, look, because she didn't like that when I first met him, I wasn't working. He let me have those like year and a half to kind of pull myself together. She thought I was using him. And I was like, what you can't understand is you met me in the middle of the worst chapter of my life. And now that you know that, because as soon as I got myself healed and going, I've been a firecracker ever since. There's no holding me down. But I was defeated when Bart met me, and he just knew I was nice and kind of quiet. He didn't understand the rivers of disappointment beneath that. Um, but through that, and then again, because this comes into play when you live in the country, we didn't have cable. When I grew up, we only had 3 radio stations and 3 TV stations. I didn't get exposed to the things other people did. So when we had cable and I saw these normal families from all these different slices, and that's really when I became aware of how weird. Because I mean, it went from my family would never do that to that's why I cry when I see that at the holidays, kind of thing. And it was a spiral. It was overwhelming. It took me probably 2 years to really sort that out and put it in boxes and feel it and file it.
Yeah, I think watching The Cosby Show, I would just love it and love the talks that they would have with their kids and love the love that they poured into each other. And that was like my show that made me so living in a dream, I guess, that I never got to live in.
And I
So it's
loved it
just
too, but it was as much a fantasy to me as a soap opera or Rudolph's Christmas. Like it was pure entertainment, and I thought they were just taking these amazing liberties. Parents weren't actually like that. And then I met some parents who were, and I'm like, "Oh crap, I got shortchanged." Like then I realized because you're in your own denial because you can't live in it any other way except to have your own denial, and then moving from denial to understanding to acceptance is a journey. But yes, the Cosby Show was huge for me because I was like, "They're so patient." Their kids screw up and they're like, "Now, Rudy, you knew not to do that. And this is a consequence." My dad would have backhanded me. And the difference between those just cannot be calculated by a 10-year-old mind.
I was going to say, whenever I would see any of those, it was just like reading a fantasy novel, or
Yeah.
it didn't seem real. Like what I was living was real life, and anything that I watched or read was obviously fantasy. And so, very similar idea there.
which is cool to hear you guys say that because I just felt like me trying to describe that, I can't find the words for that, but you guys are doing that beautifully, so I just love that.
It's kind of my thing. I write. I always get so lucky because people are like, "That's the right word." I'm like, "Well, I hope it is. I've stored a million."
And you have sense of, what is it? The sensory
Anesthesia.
synesthesia. Yes. I thought that that was you. Um, so tell
I'll explain
Araceli.
that really quick.
Yes, it's
I
so fascinating.
It is so weird, and so most people who have it, synesthesia means you make up something in your senses that isn't there. And the most common is for people to see music. Like when music is playing, they'll see pulses to the beat, or they'll see shifts in color to the mood of the music. And I taste words. And it is sometimes delightful and sometimes horrifying because I built such a big vocabulary because I'm tasting as I'm talking to you. So I get combinations in my mouth like hot dog ice cream. And so I have to learn how to pick words that fit well with other words so that they all taste right together, which is, again, I hid that from everyone. Once I figured out that not everyone did that. So I was like, why would you name your kid that? It tastes like mayonnaise? And and I thought people just didn't care, like, maybe they really love mayonnaise. And, so anyway, and so that's one of the reasons I changed my own name. My own name has a very unpleasant taste to it, Bonnie. So I shortened it to Bon for that and because I kept getting rejections in my writing, and when I changed to a gender neutral name, I sent them back to the same publications and started to get published. So it worked for both ways. But yeah, people always ask what their name tastes like. And for me, Shannon is super deep dark chocolate with almonds. And, and yours is pasta. And I don't know how to say it better than that. It's something, but what's really wild is there are tastes I would taste that I didn't even know existed yet. Like one day I actually tried, oh my God, people put on pizza and it's horrible. The fish.
Movies.
Anchovies. So I tasted anchovies for the first time, and like 4 words that I thought tasted like that were already assigned, and I'm like, "Oh, that's what that is." So the weird thing is I actually assigned flavors before I had tasted them even. It's wild.
Interesting.
But that's part of why I have such a crazy vocabulary because I have to be very careful or my tastes clash. And when I was younger, it's better older um, it was so strong it would gag me. Some words I would not say or I would actually gag. And now that I'm learning Italian, I noticed the other day Italian has no taste. No words in Italian. At this age, I am not making that link. And so Italian words don't have any flavor. And I finally get to feel normal in a completely different language.
Oh, I love that. I know that that has been a big part of your writing journey, is having to find words that didn't taste wrong. And so, but I also love that I'm deep, deep dark chocolate with almonds, because that is my favorite. So if I'm going to
Oh,
eat chocolate, it's going to be deep, deep dark chocolate with almonds. So I like that a lot.
they say when people see auras and stuff, that's what they're feeding off of. And I it's so wild, but music, and I'm 8 up with a neurodivergent, so let's just say that, like, it doesn't stop with synesthesia. Um, Now so many things I did, like listening to music to give me the chills, now I realize that was stimming. There are so many words that we didn't have for what was going on with us, and I just thought, "You can't tell anyone or they'll think you're weird that you wanna play the theme song from Footloose 18 times in a row." They're gonna think you're crazy for that, but now, like, people are like, "Oh, yeah, I'm neurodivergent, I do that every day." And so, again, like, that's just that power of having the words, like, I didn't know I was bisexual, until, years later. Um, in the '80s, there's a lot of bad representation, and I was told, "If you don't wanna be with a woman all day, every day, in every way possible, you're not gay, and you're either gay or straight." And I did that evaluation and said, "Well, I like women, but not in that way, so I'm straight." And I don't resent being married to my husband. I love him with all my heart, but I would have dated women. I missed experiences and knowing myself, simply not knowing that term and that there were shades of it, that there's a spectrum of it. Um, Robbed me of knowing myself. And I wonder how many people lived and died their whole lives never knowing something very crucial about who they were. Like, what a horrible waste that would be. And in high school, I was this way too. I was always the one who, like, I've always been funny and witty, and I'll tell the fart joke because I love them. But also, I learned with that, telling the jokes that no one else will tell goes hand in hand with telling the truths that no one else will say. And my content on social media is a blend of hilariousness and awfulness because you can't focus too much one way or the other. But I still tell the fart joke. And then I'll follow that up with something from childhood abuse that has people reaching out to me crying, and to the best of my ability, I talk to all of them, and give them the best that I can. But again, just not knowing yourself, what a horrible thing that is.
Yeah, that's that's something that we've actually seen kind of as a repeat pattern on here already. You are our eighth interview, I believe, and well, ninth interview. um, but it's so fascinating because so many of us were growing up in the 80s and not allowed to say what we felt, or my parents were firm believers in children should be seen and not heard, and so it didn't matter what emotion we showed. It was the wrong emotion. If you laughed too loud, if you got angry, if you cried, all of them were wrong emotions because you were not allowed to be heard in the household. And so I do agree. I think a lot of people have lived and died not knowing who they are just because of societal obligations or the idea that they had to adhere to a certain lifestyle in order to be accepted.
And my mom was, I can't diagnose her, but I can say she had a lot in common with bipolar disorder. Um, and she swore she hated sci fi, hated it. It was horrible. Why would you make sci fi? It's awful. She took me to see The Terminator. I don't know how I accomplished that. I must have guilted that woman insanely. But so I would have been 5. And she went to see The Terminator, which is about as sci-fi as it gets. Loved it. She was like, "Let's go see more." We went to see other movies. But she didn't know that about herself. She had assumed that sci-fi was, maybe she just didn't like Star Trek and that's what she thought it was. But she didn't know that about herself. And all the time when she was in my life later before she died, I would crack her out of her shell and be like, maybe you do like that, or just not tell her this is sci fi. Let her figure out halfway through the movie, well, I guess there is a robot, but I'm having a hell of a time. So, yay. And it was weird though, because like my mom was one of those people that was so deeply repressed because she came from a not only a 1930s family. I was an oops baby, but my her family was a criminal family. Two of my uncles were hitmen. My grandfather was involved in all kinds of things, and my great grandmother qualified as a serial killer. We don't know how many husbands she killed. We know of several. And it was always stories like Uncle Frank died when the radio fell in the bathtub, and people are like, Uncle Frank didn't like music. So like we tack that up to her later and get it all figured out. But anyway, my mom came from that where you did not speak your thoughts. And if it was at all contrary to what they wanted you to say, you didn't say it. You just kept that inside. And she lived a horrible life, married to my father was her third abusive husband. And then she died in a domestic violence situation. My mom lived and died never having a day of peace or a moment of reflection. And I hate that for her. That's one of the greatest regrets I have for her is not our relationship, but that she never had one with herself. She was always chasing safety. And I think we know what that's like too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I remember talking to a life coach that I had, and I was sitting on the porch and I was going through a rough time. And this was not long ago, maybe 2021. And she was talking to me about how, I just need to find a person that feels safe, and how she would always, like, when she was feeling like I was feeling like my life was out of control, she would just like think of her dad and how safe, and how she knew that he had her back no matter what. And I remember thinking, I don't have a person like that. Like, I have developed some very deep friendships, and I'm super grateful for that. But as far as like one person where I'm like, I can think of that person and I know that safety exists in that realm, I've never had that. And I was like, I don't think I know what that feels like. And she was so confused by that. And I think a lot of people who come from trauma and from abusive backgrounds or even neglectful backgrounds, that's something that they struggle with for the rest of their lives, because we don't necessarily allow ourselves to have that. And we're always waiting for the other shoe to drop, per se.
One thing I read that I just thought was fascinating because I do this and I didn't realize I did it till I read it. If you're a victim of childhood abuse and they get to you when you're very young and they do the whole we know what you're thinking and you believe that they know what you're thinking, if you've lived your whole life, like when I'm home alone, 48 years old, I'm home completely alone. I feel like there's a camera on me and that I need to be good for the camera. And that is a neurodivergent thing for masking. And that is also a trauma response. And I realize I do that, and I've been trying to break myself of it, of pick your nose, it's okay, no one's actually here. But I would sit at home, like when my parents were gone, that whole time feeling like they were watching me. I would just sit very still. I didn't move, I didn't play, I didn't make any noise. I sat like a good girl. And that is still a horrible default I've carried into my life that I'm just now shaking off. And I'm so glad I have the best husband, but it wasn't anything that I did right. It was luck, just luck, because I would have bonded with any man that could have offered me safety where I was coming from. And it just happened to be a fantastic one. But I quit smoking for 13 years, had one cigarette because a friend died, and I said, I'm going to go have one for Tom. Next thing I knew, a week later, it was a pack a day. And I had to tell Bart that I had failed in I hated smoking. And I was like, honey, I have to tell you something really hard. I've really fucked up and I need you to not be mad at me. I'm smoking again and I promise I'll quit as soon as I can. And I knew he was not going to explode. He might be disappointed in me. And he wasn't even that. He was like, okay, that sucks, but we'll get through it together. That was one of my great awakenings of I'm safe now. And like that I have someone finally that I can tell the absolute ugliest things. Like, I'm not perfect. I did something really bad when I was 13, really bad. And I never told a soul about it. And I told my husband, and he was like, "Ooh, but okay." And it's like, oh my God, because he understands. And normal people understand your life is a spectrum of your worst act to your best one. And I've always judged myself by anything less than my best is a failure. And he was like, that wasn't great. But he's like, was it really that bad? You were 13. And it's like, oh, I've just carried it like a stone because I didn't deal with it. And so poor Bart is my psychologist. We take a lot of road trips together, and that man has listened. Um, but it's what made me whole again. Getting that all out. I finally looked at it as like an emotional throwing up. I mean, literally, you throw the sickness out of you. And I've adopted a new spiritual practice where I take whatever is bothering me and I put it in a box. And just the freedom of getting it out of your head where you feel like you have to carry it with you because you can't forget it. That's even worse. Of putting it into the box and taking it out of that box when I'm strong enough to process those issues. And that's really my best trick for myself is choosing my moments, knowing I have to do the work, like I hold up my end of the bargain, but giving myself grace to only do it when I can do it well. I'm not doing it day to day in a crisis survival situation now, and that's, you know, privilege.
Sorry, I get so teary-eyed because I feel like that's my husband too. He came in when, really early in my life, and he was my saving grace. So he's just amazing and always there. And, like I've never known love like that. And I said that in the wedding vows, and I say it constantly. He's just, I don't know, he's an angel sent from God, is what I
I
always
truly
say.
could not be who I am without my husband having carried me through the times when I couldn't carry myself. And when I met him, we were having fun, but I was exhausted from 20 years of abuse. So I just couldn't go much further. And then when I met him, it was just kind of timing that I just collapsed. And and he was there and I was like, because I didn't trust anyone. The people I've been told my whole life you have to obey, the police, your teachers, your family, the men in your life. They know what's best. All of them took advantage of me. So it took me a while to figure out I didn't just have one more. But when I actually let go, I was like, oh my God, I'm safe with him. And again, if I had not met him, if I'd met an abusive husband and I didn't have the strength at 22 to have pulled myself out alone. So I would have just gone that path and been lost. So again, when I think about meeting people and giving them just the right words at just the right time, sometimes that one phrase takes hold and that's what you needed. And so I try to do that as much as I can.
For me, I did go down the abusive path. And I remember a police officer, not the time that I left, but the time right previous to that. There was an incident with a gun, and it was a lot. And he looked at me and he said, "You're not going to make it through this." And I was like, kind of like, "What do you care?" And he was like, "You're not going to make it through this. Is this really what you want to leave your kids with?" And so that next incident, which, he got convicted 6 felonies for what he did to me in the next incident. And I remember when I woke up in the hospital thinking, he was right. Like, he was absolutely right. Is this the life that I want to leave my kids with? And I didn't have a Bart or a Jordan in, but I did have a Sarah. And my best friend has been my sounding board. And so I did find a place where I could see something different for my life. And I think that is so critical. And that's the whole point of this podcast, is to show people that there is hope no matter what they're going through. Because I think so many people don't realize that their situation is not unique.
I thought I was the only one going through what I was going through. I bet you in our tiny ass school, I was one of many going through what I was going through. And my mom, she it's a complicated story, so the quickest summary is my stepfather shot her, injured her. She went back and killed him, and then she froze, and she stayed in the house for 3 days, barely alive, afraid to leave, and she killed herself rather than face the world after having killed her husband. But one of the things that I think of, and I see my mom and so many women, is that after she died and I was there talking to the police said, "Well, why didn't you call us?" And that's not the best way to phrase that question, but it was valid. And I kind of went off and I was like, We didn't know." But then years later, when I had time with myself and I was quiet, we did know. And I realized the strongest part of domestic violence and abuse is that you don't talk. And even though it wasn't my personal abuse, I knew that I was not supposed to talk about it. And in a poem I wrote, it says you don't call the name of the person who slides up behind you and puts their hand on your waist. You don't say it out loud because if you do, you're liable for it. And that's the single biggest thing I do when I bust through all of these with abuse, violence, rape, and molestation is to talk about the things that no one wants to hear. But once you hear it, you feel better. And once you know, you can say with oomph, you know what's going on. But to not be able to talk, to know that someone was threatening to kill my mother, but that we couldn't talk about it, and that eventually she died, I couldn't have saved her. I've worked past that, but I can save other women who are still on this side of things and tell them, you can talk. You can tell me, I'll never tell a soul. I will die before I repeat your story if you don't want me to. But you can tell me everything. And once they say it out loud and they have to connect those dots for another person, something happens and they shift towards saving themselves almost every time. It's just like when I can't figure something out, I'll pretend I'm teaching someone else about it. And that just walks you through the linear path of logic of plugging in your knowledge gaps. And they have done the same thing. And it has been so huge. But again, they don't want you to talk, they want you to be quiet. It's a woman's duty to suffer in silence, and it's the kids' duties to keep those secrets. And that is what has to change. But in a rural community, and I keep coming back to that, in a rural community, it is so much easier to keep those secrets because you don't have any outside influences breaking down walls and trying to get to you. You are isolated. And that is the truth.
Absolutely. Um, so I want to hear a little bit about what you're doing now. You've kind of hinted at it, but we've really been focused on your story, which is so powerful. I think that we could talk for hours, obviously, about the things that you've been through and all of that. But let's talk a little bit about what you're doing now, what you have done for like I said, my friend was part of the Sunshine Law. Is that what it's called?
Oh, okay. Yes, yes.
Um, and so let's just kind of dig into what you're doing to help women and what that looks like now.
Sure. So when I was up and coming, and this is one of the ones that kind of put me on the map, a very young councilman was being played by a church. They put him in office, they paid for his seat, they paid for his campaign, they wanted to knock women down. So he had been in office all of 2 weeks before he set up a law that said side boob, top boob, and any buttock can get you arrested. They were selling clothes at the mall that you couldn't wear on our streets. And it was to keep women safe from rape. And it was to shut down Rape Walk, which is a protest of women wearing what they were wearing when they were attacked. And when you went, you saw anything from ugly sweats to, ball gowns. It didn't matter. And that's the point of the demonstration. But they shut that down, which uh, lots of people got involved in that. But I knew then something was wrong. And I said, you're not looking at rape victims the right way. You're not looking at actual people. You're regurgitating stories. Like, rather than actually help women and find women, one of the things they were doing, they got involved with a charity that I busted that was supposed to be working with sex trafficking, human trafficking. So these men were walking around with guns on their hips in Springfield, guns, walking up to a woman that they thought looked like she might be trafficking. So, any woman wearing a low button blouse who looked like she might be a little hot for action, they would stop with a gun, preach to her, pray with her on the sidewalk, and then try to shove a basket of goodies in her arms of canned goods and stuff like that. That's how they were fixing rape. And I was like, "You're not doing them any good. You're scaring the hell out of women that don't know who you are." And come to find out, this is all important because 3 or 4 years later, CNN published a story that our uh, police had destroyed over 200 rape kits, 200 that were within the statutes. they could have been prosecuted. One of them belonged to a 4-year-old girl who had blue teddy bears on her dress entered as evidence. She had until she was in her 50s to prosecute, but they destroyed the evidence. There was semen on that dress, and they destroyed it. They guaranteed they could never prosecute the man who hurt her. And knowing what we know he was a relative, and we know that his access to her was never limited. So they doomed her to childhood rape continuing for no reason that they would offer on record. The chief of police oversaw, I want to say 110 of the 200, the guy that we have in office now. And the reaction from the city was horrible. His boss, the city manager, never acknowledged the rape victims, jumped on the next morning in a uh, interview to say he supported Chief Williams. He knew he was a good man who did a good job, despite overwhelming evidence that it wasn't. The city public information officer promised that we would get information that CNN didn't have. They made this up to look bad. So we said, okay, give it. It's been 5 years. I've never seen it. So I said, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I had already established myself. City council and the mayor were aware of me. I was friends with the former mayor. He used to tell me that when they'd go in and have meetings, someone would pull some crap. And they'd stop and say, "What will Bon Tyndall say about this?" Because they knew then, years ago, if they started, I would make them so miserable that they'd wish they'd never done it. That's the only way you can reach these people. You cannot nicely speak your way through to them. You have to make them sorry. So that's what I did. And I asked for the emails, all emails related to the rape kits. I wrote it out very carefully with help from other people to make sure that we got it as wide as we wanted, but specific enough to not just where they could just drown us and stuff. So I waited for a year. And in that time, they approached the attorney general and said, "Could you please rewrite the sunshine law so that we don't have to comply with this?" And he did not answer. I never heard an answer. So silence is no. So I was lucky. And the only reason I was lucky was because the AG, who also had problems, was knee deep in his own legal battle. But I finally got my 200 my emails on the 200 rape kits. And they were embarrassing. They were horrible. It was Chief Williams saying, "Here's another one complaining." Um, there was no compassion, no understanding. When they made a task force that was so pitiful that the people participating said, "This is not enough. We will not sign off on your activity." They did the minimum amount. They this city worked to protect at least 200 rapists. And you have to ask, which one of those rapists was a cop who needed to be covered up? Because if they don't want you to wonder things like that, they should have left the record intact. But Springfield is one of the most crooked police forces there are. I have heard stories from women from the very beginning, years before the CNN article, of police officers exchanging favors for other things. Um, there were a lot of reasons that the police force may have wanted to cover 200 official rape kits. They were done sometimes the day that the person reported them. They sent them a letter that said, "Respond or your case is closed." And they literally took advantage of and abused these women. And I fought with them, but I was limited in what I could do because I don't have the funds for the legal force that it would have taken to have penetrated what it needed. So I made them sorry as hell. I still do. I have ways. But I also had some health problems and some things have slowed me down. So I have shifted now to being that girl who was told I couldn't write about certain things because men at tables don't want to publish them. I've started a publishing company, an independent publishing company. I own it and I choose what we publish. And I seek out women of color, queer voices, people whose stories are important to us right now, but if they went to a mainstream press would never get them published. We are also doing work going around to assisted living facilities, getting poetry from people who are in their last years that we don't want to miss their memories. And right now we have none. But the focus of my work is marginalized communities and getting them where they are heard, where they are valued, where they are just treated because nobody can write a queer character, like a queer person. I include them to be diverse, but I never make them a main character because it's not my experience to speak to. And I don't want to do that and do a bad job of it. So what I do instead is elevate the voices who are telling those stories. And it has met with a lot of resistance. I've had people meet with me to discuss their concerns, and these are usually book burning people who just don't think that these books should exist. And I tell them, because I don't care, that I'm a bisexual witch, and I wouldn't know any of those things about myself if I did not have the books that helped me discover that. And so that's what I'm doing for someone else. And then they clutch their pearls, and I say, clutch them a little tighter. It's okay. And but they still want to strike down. And the reason they're so dead set against us being heard is because there are kids and other people behind us, even people my age, who are going to hear something and say, "Oh my God, that's me. That's me. I'm neurodivergent. I'm not crazy. I'm not dysfunctional. I'm just different." And then you learn that you're not uncontrolled, you're not OCD, you don't have compulsions, you're stimming because that's a natural part of your condition. And when you know that, so much guilt slides off of you. It's it's an awakening. And so many people have been deprived of that, but especially in the Bible Belt where you have set replies. People get power from saying things like, "How's it hanging?" You're supposed to say, "To the left." They love that control because that's an engineered answer. When you give the right answer, you're showing you've been taught and you're playing along. If they say how's it going and you tell them the truth, you will blow their minds. They were not expecting it. And I now realize what we consider neurotypical is really piss poor communication. Like my mother would say, the sink's full of dishes. She would never say, could someone please do the dishes? She would walk around what she needed to say. And we are taught to do that so that we're not offensive. Smooth voice, soften your words. Twitter broke me of that because you just don't have time for all the pleases and sweet words. But you're supposed to soften your point, make it palatable. Don't offend them, don't intimidate them. Deliver it gently, and the good people will do what they're. That is the trickle down economics of decency. It doesn't work. So my entire career path, and I don't recommend this for everyone. My advice for everyone is contribute to break the system with the gifts that you have. But my gift is that I'm a wrecking ball. I charge in, I break things down, and I make people who do bad things sorry. And I'm really good at it. And people who watch me on social media, that's the show. They will bring me something that's dysfunctional. I will tear it apart and show with logic and goodwill how to rebuild it. But the eventual truth of our city is determined to protect crooked cops and rapists, and there's no way to fight an entire city. And so I fight teaching people better. Again, teaching them to look for the turtlenecks in August, teaching them how to actually support because people say, well, call DFS. Think it through. Think through your actions. Is this the right time? Is that the right step? Is that going to help this child? Or is that your way of shoving it off of you and going on about your merry life? There are differences, and we need to be able to have those conversations to understand the nuances of them.
I want to speak to the call DFS thing because my parents were reported numerous times. And then, as you know, my custody battle with my ex ended up going through DFS. And I think a lot of times that can do more harm than good if there's not a person besides the system that is willing to be responsible for those children at the end of the day. Because what we found with my sibling situation was very different than what happened with my own children. But I had to take it from DFS's hands, and there was no one to do that for my brothers and sisters. And so I ended up with guardianship of my sister, and another sister of mine ended up with guardianship of one of my brothers. And there has to be an end person to take responsibility because the foster care system is overrun. And if they return those children to that household after a report, and it's directly after, those children will be punished for that.
And abusers are smart. My dad told me, if anyone ever asks, you tell them everything's great, or they'll take you away and they'll put you with criminals. And when you're a kid, you cling to what you know. It's all you have that's safe. So that dysfunctional farm was still my safe place, even though it was horrible. And so I would have done anything to have stayed there rather than throw the dice, because look at the dice so far, like I had no reason to hope. And, also in one of my books, I cover that over a period of time, I want to say like 2,000 foster children came up missing, never to be seen again. Like, there is an underground market that we need to confront, that people don't want to have the uncomfortable conversations. There is a child market out there being exploited. And right now, especially with the deregulation we're about to face, which was already bad enough, but it's going to get worse, we need to be watching out for these kids and these young women young people, because it affects both genders, people who are just aging out of that, who have no support, and they're just thrown into the world with a what you've seen on, Hallmark Channel better work for you, and it doesn't. And so we have to do better for them. There's no good, but I mean, there are times in an immediate beating or situation like that where you do call DFS, where it's over your head, over your pay grade. You can't possibly get to the bottom of it. There's times it's right, but I think people need to be careful with it and understand that it's like calling the police. If there's a minority or certain people present, that makes a situation worse. So sometimes calling the police is not the best answer if two neighbors are just arguing really bad, where other people would immediately jump and call. You have to take in factors, and that's terrible, but it's the reality of their life, and we need to respect and honor that. I mean, there's no way I'd want someone to call the police on me if I'd watched them shoot 10 people who look just like me in the last month. So, we need to be aware of those things, and we need to, like, all those teachers who knew that I was neglected and was hungry, they would sneak me food. They knew I was hungry, but not one person ever said, "When is your dad coming home?" Never. So they really didn't help me. I mean, they let it go on. And at 8 years old, what could I have possibly known to have contributed to the solution? So I watch kids a lot, and I see things in restaurants, and my husband knows I get this face. I don't even know what it looks like, honestly. But I'll hear something and I'll turn my head. And when my chin comes up, he's like, "What? What table? Who is it? What's going on?" And like, one woman just absolutely tore into her daughter, her maybe 10-year-old daughter, and destroyed her ego right there at the table in front of everybody. And it was all I could do not to just go throw water in her face. Because I understand that's not an isolated incident. That is a continuation of abuse that she experiences worse when there are no witnesses. But also, the fact that we as a society look away and pretend we don't see it encourages her to do what she does. But how do I intervene in a way that that little girl doesn't pay twice as much when I'm out of sight? It's These are things, and it's women are used to this. Women are used to that guy who comes over and says, "Can I talk to you?" And you have 5 seconds to decide if he's a rapist or not. That's the same window in that situation. You have 5 seconds to figure out: do I speak? Do I not? Do I put her at risk? Do I save her? Do I shame the mom? Is the mom the kind of person that if I embarrass her will be so scalded she'll never do it again? Because those women exist, and boy, do I love those women. Um, but you have to think it through, and people aren't good at that. And until we can have honest conversations, we never will be. So that's the mission. Because I remember 48 years old, I go to the doctor. They put me in the hospital for 3 days. I was so sick. But the doctor's asking me, "How are you doing?" "I'm great, doc. Here's my best joke." Because when I was little, my dad stood behind the doctor and looked at me, and I knew not to tell where those bruises came from. I learned to be on for the doctor to distract him from what was wrong with me. And these learned behaviors carry through generations. Kids do that and don't even know why. That's it's carrying on, and then we have to stop. And the only way we can stop it is with honesty.
Mhm. So the doctor thing resonates tremendously with me, because I went through 7 years of trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And they just kept saying, "Well, you're probably depressed. You've been through trauma. probably depressed. And finally I went in and I kind of lost my shit. And I was like, I'm not depressed. My life is going well right now. Everything is good, but I'm sleeping all the time. And I was a little more forceful than that. And crying. And I was like, please, please listen to me. And I think we are trained, because every time I would go in there, I'd be kind and I'd be sweet. And like you were saying, soften your words, move around a topic. And that was so ingrained in me that I could not advocate for myself because I was so afraid to offend someone. And
Because offending someone wasn't for other people like it was for you. For other people, they're offended and they'll get over it. For you, that was a potentially life threatening situation, and you
exactly,
avoided it like one.
exactly. And so I had never placed that with the doctors until just this moment.
And so
Um,
that's what I do on social media is I write these stories because you can hear things a million times, but one day you'll hear it just the right way. And you'll be like, there's the seed planted. And I do this for women because we have been conditioned to accept our abuse for so many centuries, we don't even know we're doing it. And so I explain to women when a man, when he slams cabinets, he's telling you he wants to hit you. He's not slamming the cabinets to save you. He's slamming the cabinets to let you know what's next. And every victim of abuse is like, hell yeah, he is. And the people who are in that borderline situation where they haven't crossed that realm yet, now they have a reason to think and say, oh my God, that's what that is. And all I can do is hope that, because women contact me all the time and I love it every day in my inbox. There are multiple women saying, I didn't think about it till you said it. What does this mean? And I actually like, I don't publicize my books only to women where I'll be like, I put it all together here in this for you. It's, priced for your convenience. Read this and then come back to me. And they will come back every time and be like, I understand so much more now. Um, because we're just taught to take it. And if we don't accept our abuse, then we're being rebellious, which somehow to their logic entitles them to punish us. So we are punished for trying to not be abused. And we have to do better than that, especially for children who have absolutely no advocacy in an abusive home. And they're learning that. I learned I can't trust anybody. I love my husband with every beat of my heart. It would be really hard for me to trust him with my very, very life because my foundation was built on you can't trust. And so to trust him as much as I do is the statement of a lifetime, but it's parked at 99.99% and it will never budge to 100. And that's just lived experience. I hope women know that we have different gifts for a reason and that instead of trying to fight my way or someone else's way, they learn to fight their way. Because learning to fight, because there was a time when a councilwoman was driving by my house stalking me. Someone had called in complaints. People were following me. I was being threatened, all because I dared speak and I made him look really bad. I made fun of them. When they sent me a threatening message, I posted it with their name and said, hey, here's what they're saying. And I had the city behind me. If you step out, I will catch you, is what I want to tell these women. There are people like us out there. If you take those first few steps so that we know where you are, we will come find you. That's the work we're doing. You know, again, in the Bible Belt, it's a little unconventional that I'm not a Christian, but we do a lot of work. I've taken deathbed confessions. I've done spiritual work for women who are dying or know they're going to die. And I have an entire folder on my computer of if I die, please make sure these messages are delivered for women who may not make it through. And people who love to say just leave don't understand they can't. Like I'm brilliant. I'll sit and crack them out with them. Some of them can't leave right now. And that's just the truth of it. And we need to stop blaming them and just start saying, when you get a second, blink twice. I'm watching. And just let them know you're there. I want women to know we're out there. And so I thank you guys for doing what you do because we need to hear these stories. People say, well, women didn't build the world. The hell we didn't. We just got cut out of the history books. So now in the present, let them know we're here.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We're very passionate about this, so we hope to inspire change and help lives if it's just one. Looking back, is there anything you wish you had known earlier in your journey that might help someone else on a similar path?
That I was right. I was right. When I looked at things and said, that can't possibly be the way, and 1980s society said, yeah, it is, I was right. And they are right too. There is no worse betrayal than when we betray ourselves. And we are taught to betray ourselves constantly for our very safety and for our lives. And you have to make some hard choices, but you're right. Whatever you're thinking, whatever you're reading into that situation, your gut is telling you the truth, and respond accordingly.
If you could give our listeners one piece of advice to help them find purpose and turn their challenges into positive change, what would it be?
Find your gift at your core. I'm a writer and I fought with words. They tried to drag me into other arenas and I didn't. I absolutely devastated them from my own strength. Find your gift and how it plugs in and then use the hell out of it. And don't let anyone tell you you're failing because you're not doing it the way that person's doing it. You have your purpose. I was built to be this person. I was born to be this person. And if I had decided to be a meek, quiet housewife, I would have betrayed everything about who I am and what I was meant to be. And if you want to feel like you have fulfilled your life, you cannot do it with any shortcuts except to be what you were meant to be. And once you figure out what that is, put all of your work into being the best of that there is. And you will have fulfilled your small role in a giant sea of trouble.
Well, first, I want to say for years now, I heard this phrase, I don't even know where, but it was when we take personal account responsibility, we collectively change the world. And that's kind of been my sign off on my blog posts and everything that I've written for years now is as we each take personal responsibility to become the best version of us, we will collectively change the world. And I love that that is your piece of advice because I think that's the most powerful thing that we can possibly do is learn who we are and then live in that. And so our
When people
last
see you doing
question,
it, it inspires them as well because people all the time say, I would have never done whatever if I hadn't read that you said it was okay. Women are waiting for permission. We've been taught to sit still and wait to be told it's okay. And we need to learn that that can come from other women. So we're telling you it's okay. It's
absolutely.
time.
Absolutely. So we always wrap up the episodes with the question in the black is a financial term meaning to be in the positive. And so when you look at your life now, what does it mean to be in the black for you?
It meant reconciling with all of the things that happened to me that were not my fault. And it meant taking that and turning it into something good. There are people who are terrified of me. They should be. But there are people who know that I will stand between them and whatever's coming after them and I will never budge. And that is me. That is what I was born to be. And to be in the black means to have done all of that internal work to understand that if my parents had actually stayed with me every day, I would be so damaged and I'd have never crawled out. So I am the sum of everything, good and bad. And I can do with that whatever I want. And I choose to use it to fight back.
That's beautiful.
Gosh,
How do
that
you
I sound really
envision
mean in this podcast. I hope people know like, I'm a kitten loving good person. Like I feel the need to just put that on the record. I'm a delight. I love me. But but people know not to hurt innocence in front of me. And it is documented. It is whispered in halls. It is known by many. And if more people can come out that way and be that force of nature they were meant to be, we will turn the tide, but we can't do it as a group. You have to do it individually first. You have to do that internal work. Otherwise, you take 2 steps and you get slapped back. You've got to be unslappable. And the only way you can do that is by coming to terms with yourself.
See, that's so cool because I feel like, one of the reasons we started this podcast is because there was something just constantly like, I don't know what it was, just nagging at me or, pulling at me. And all my life growing up was fairness. Like, why are people so mean? Why are people like abusive or like, and then they get away with it. And like, how is this fair? Why is this happening? So I feel like there's something, tugging at me. And I don't know. It's fascinating how you're utilizing it and you have the platform. And so I don't know what that's going to look like for us, me and Shannon, but I feel like we're here because we're supposed to be. We didn't see this coming, but we're here. And I feel like maybe in the far distance, we're going to see why we're doing this. But at the moment, I mean, this is just, like I said, I want to hang out with you and I just want to like talk with you for hours. It's just is really fascinating. And I'm hoping to, be able to live my purpose and find out why this matters to me so much. And maybe that would be, I still need more healing to do or something. So it's just cool to
The
see
Wonder
and
Woman
very
movie
cool.
spoke to people, women, not men. Men missed it. Like I had a man tell me, she was just too naive. No, sir, she's pointing out the ridiculousness of a man's world from someone who was not raised in it. When you are just confronted with war without honor, when you've been raised your whole life. But I love the scene in Wonder Woman, the scene where she climbs up and she says, "No, that's what I'm going to do." After they told her, "You can't win the war this way. You have to go this way. You cannot succeed if you don't do this first." She just looked and said, "You're just missing it, pal." And she went and did what she needed to do. And Wonder Woman was born. Like just the idea that men who have created the rules that got us in this mess in the first place are not the ones to tell us, here's how you dig yourself out. They want us to dig ourselves out in a way that is convenient for them, that does not challenge the status quo. That cannot happen. We're building for better, not the same. So the only way we can do that is to say, this is what I'm going to do. And if you don't like it, sit here in the trench and go do what you got to do and show them how it's done, because I've done that. And I've had men say, I didn't know anyone could do that. And it's like, you didn't try, did you? So I step out, I put my butt on the line. Absolutely. I've never lost. I can say that someday I will, but I've never lost because I make sure I'm doing the right thing before I take all the risk. And if people do that instead of chasing the glory or the power or whatever it is that they think that they want, if they just do it for the sake of the rightness of it, literally by that definition, you'll never be wrong. It's really that simple. They want to make it complicated. It's as simple as saying, this is what I'm going to do, and climbing out and doing it. We're not all bulletproof, but if we were, wouldn't that be fantastic?
How do you envision your work and impact growing in the future?
At this point, I am approaching 50, not in good health. So I'm still doing all the things that I'm doing, but I am transitioning it to other women who have done the work and are coming out the other side saying, oh, I have truly started to heal and see what needs to be done, and I'm ready to join. Because a lot of people want to join before they've done the work, and you can't. You just can't. So I am working with those women coming out and still doing my constant education for the women who are just stepping in, who are like new to the idea that it's not your fault that they did this to you. It's not your fault that you didn't report, because you were right to know it wouldn't have worked back then. So those are the things that are really important to me. But eventually I want to transition to where other people are doing it and I'm helping them and keeping the movement going. But age is age. So I've done my tour. I'm changing it now, but I still want to be relevant. I still want to be impactful. So all of this experience that I have, I'm now collecting into books and social media, leaving a record where someday if I'm not here anymore, people can still go. There's a meme that I love that says, I hope one day someone picks my words up off a page and says, I would have loved her. That's what I want. I want people to pick up my words 100 years from now and say, she was right because I was right. And or even find inspiration. Maybe the patriarchy hasn't fallen. And maybe I'm the Jane Austen of 200 years from now when they need a voice. Because there's another meme that says scream so that your sisters don't ever one day wonder why her voice fell into silence. I'm screaming. And that's all I've got in me. But that's what I'm going to do because again, it's my strength, it's my gift. It's not for everybody, but I do it well and I want to do it as long as I can.
And where can our listeners find you?
Oh, that's easy. My name is Bon Tyndall, Tindle, and you can find me on Facebook or Threads under that name. That's where I spend most of my time. TikTok, I'm not there as often as I want to be, and TikTok's probably going away. So, but I do most of my work on Facebook and Threads, and you will see me post something, and you will see men unable to help themselves come in to correct me, and you will see me absolutely blast their ass to the moon because I do not tolerate that. And women learn from that so much of men saying, "Well, I just don't agree," and me saying, "I don't care if you agree. It was never your business to begin with," and leaving them in their bullshit and walking away. And women are like, no, no, we're supposed to argue with them and prove that we're no. Let them be wrong and loud and let them live that life. They are. Look at the male suicide rate. They are reaping their own repercussions. Save yourself. Save the women. Let the men sort themselves out. And they can come to, I help men too, but I'm not going to fight them to do it. They have to be ready to do the work or they can go be somebody else's problem. And I think more women need to see that because we've been taught to save men against their will. Like we're supposed to drag a husband into being a good husband, even though he doesn't want to. He doesn't want to do Christmas pictures. He doesn't want to do dishes. He doesn't even know how to vacuum. But we're supposed to drag him through adulthood. No, we've had to climb our own way since the dawn of time. They can taste their own medicine and let me know how it feels. So yeah, I'm a hoot and a holler. Come find me for cat butts on Facebook and Threads.
Yes, and that's Bon Tyndall, correct, on both of those?
Yes, correct. Bontindle.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate you joining us. I knew it was going to be a good time. And I think it's funny that you were like, people are going to think I'm so mean because you have been nothing but the kindest, sweetest human since I've met you. You're just very passionate about making sure that the world is a better place. And I love that about you.
Well, the
And
people who say I'm mean are trying to do mean things. And so when I get in their way, they're like, well, that's not nice. It's like, I don't care.
yeah, absolutely. And that has been my experience with you completely.
Well,
So
thank you. I feel better, guys. You heard it. I am a delight. That's the thing I want you to take away from all of this. I'm always right and I'm a delight. Thank you, Sharon.
Yes, absolutely. And to all of our listeners out there, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of In the Black. I hope that Bon's story left you feeling inspired and reminded of the incredible strength that lies in each of us. She has definitely taken her toughest challenges and transformed them into something beautiful, showing us that even in the darkest moments, there is a way to bring light to the world. So
If you enjoyed today's conversation, make sure to subscribe and share In the Black with another woman who could use a little encouragement. Together, we're building a community of passion, purpose, and power. Until next time, stay strong, stay inspired, and remember, your story matters. Your choices change things. And being your most authentic self can and will change the world around you.
when I was in the hospital for that, I had been drugged and I didn't know what had happened the night before. So I went to do a rape kit. And basically, the police officer that responded was like, this is basically worthless and nothing's going to happen. So you probably shouldn't even worry about it.
You know, the police who handled mine were really bad. But the worst part was I was young. I'd never been in trouble with the cops. I didn't know they were going to impound my car for evidence. So I would have no way to get home from the police station at 3 a.m. on Saturday night. And all I had done, it was in a grocery store parking lot. I'd gotten my first promotion at this stupid telemarketing job, but by God, I was making it. So I went to get ice cream because where I lived in the country, you couldn't just go get ice cream. So I was like, oh, we're going to have ice cream for no reason at all. Yay. And they turned me loose, kicked me out of the hospital, and somewhere between 3 and 4 a.m., I was still picking glass out of my face from where it had been in the parking lot. And not a word that I didn't even know I'd been discharged. So they came in. They're like, why are you still here? You know, it was horrible. The police were terrible. The medical staff were uncaring. They weren't cruel, but there was zero care or concern at all. And
Yeah.
yeah, and even people who meant well, who were trying to comfort me, were saying, "It's not going to go anywhere. Why are you doing it?" You know.
Yep. That was exactly my experience.
And that's what we do with
Like,
abuse too. You know, like, well, it made you stronger. Bitch, no, it didn't. It gave me therapy for 10 years. You know, like, it's not a blessing. Stop trying to repackage our abuse as a blessing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And in
and
that
that you're
silence, I mean, horrible things grow. It's I I don't understand. I truly don't understand people. I'm not knocking them. I don't understand people who keep their secrets buried deep inside forever. I broke at about 17, before my rape even, and was like, I'm going to talk about all of this. And I couldn't shut up if you made me. If you put a gun to my head, I'd be like, this is how I meet the Lord because I'm not stopping. I can't not talk about it. And I feel so very crippling sorry for the people who carry that and don't have the relief or the restraint. You know, I truly don't understand. I wish I did so that I could break that little piece and pull it free, because that's what they need. But with those kind of people, it's like really shy people. I drive them so far in, they never come out again. So with shy people, I'm like dim light.
I I struggle still to talk about anything, especially in regards to my kid's dad, because I'm terrified that there will be repercussions there. And I don't know, I don't talk about my childhood. I started to write that book and I sent an excerpt to my mom and she wrote me back and she was like, I wasn't neglectful. I wasn't this. She got really, really offended. And I was like, Mom, you were in bed most of my childhood. Like, and I'm aware you were living with a monster. And so, like, I can understand, I can relate, I get it. But that is the reality of what my childhood looked like.
And that's where I get also struggle with is like the same. I think my mom did things, but I know she's struggling with her own. And if I talk about it, I'm going to hurt her or that I'm crazy and I just made that up. And I know that it's not because my husband's seen it and like she is not a great person. So it's like it's still a struggle. Like I think we're all healing until like the day we die. But being able to I guess, have people on the podcast like yourself and other people who have, are doing something about it and like, putting things out there and helping other people, I think is beneficial. And like I said earlier, I'm like, I don't know why we're here and, why, um, yeah, what led us here, but I feel like we're here for a reason. So
Think of
hopefully
who
we'll,
all you're reaching. Like I did the math and I suck at math. So grain of salt this. But there's like 335 million people in the United States. You cut that in half strictly for women. You multiply that by 20% to see how many of the 1 in 5 will be raped in their lifetime. That is approximately 30 million people, 32 million people. I went to find what could make 32 million people stick in someone's head. It's fucking Texas. Every man, woman, and child in Texas is the number of rape victims we have in the United States right now. That's how many people you're reaching. They,
Mhm.
I mean, there, you may not see it on your side, but you're reaching people. I mean, think about how many people you've ever met or worked with or whatever. And that's the other thing I say. How many doctors do you know from Texas? How many bosses have you had from Texas? Just to kind of show how victims flood the population because there's so many of us. But also, for every rapist or victim, there is a rapist. And that's the other point that I drive home. There's as many rapists as there are people in Texas roaming the United States right now. a state so big, it's written in that it can secede. And people are like, well, one man may rape 12 women. True, but one woman may be raped 4 or 5 times in her life. I've been raped 3 times, 3 different men, 3 completely different sets of circumstances. So I was trying to explain, as Shannon knows our friend Bob, I was explaining to him that more people are raped than have cancer. You're never surprised when someone who has cancer gets it a second time because something's so common that's going to happen. But we don't think about that. We think with rape, your card is punched and you're free, never to experience that again. And that's just not how it is.
Yeah.
Or that we sought out to be raped, like we invited it. I think that's the most common thing.
And they teach
Which is
us that when we're
unfortunate.
young, all we need is male validation. There's only one way to get that, and it gets you raped. So they teach you to do it, and then they complain when the inevitable happens. Meanwhile, the girl doing it is so young, she has no understanding of what's is happening. At 18, I didn't know what it meant to wear a short skirt. I was young and healthy and happy, and I loved that dress. I was not thinking about the the patriarchy. I mean, they just think you dress for them. Like, why would
Mm.
you put on makeup if it's not for them to see you look better?
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. But that's exactly, it's the thought process. We cannot outlaw it enough because they're never going to prosecute it. We can only change it societally, and that's what you guys are doing. And I'm so grateful for you because the more of us that shout, the further it goes. So if I can ever help in any way, let me know. Like, I'll be glad to plug your episodes and whatever I can do. I appreciate your work.
Yeah, if you want to do that, if you want to send women our way who are willing to tell their stories, just send them that link because that goes through to where we put people in the podcast. So,
Have you talked to Janice Thompson yet?
yeah, she was our first guest.
I missed her then, but okay, because I was like, I know several, and so yes, I will gladly send them your way. But she was obviously the best and clearest choice of that.
Yeah. No, I don't know if you knew this, but she went to court with me for my kids. And
No,
because she kept my kids, I spent 36 days in the hospital in 2018, and she kept my kids for my part of that. And then she had to do the handoff to Justin. And when she did that, um, Justin left my daughter's inhaler and wouldn't take it back because he didn't want to see her again. And so she reported that to the court. And then she talked about how sad the kids got and all of that. And the judge was the judge who was on her case with Greg, and who finally was like, okay, I guess you can have custody now that he's shot a man. It was the same judge. And so seeing her face, I hope, brought up some memories and made him realize, this is the type of person that you're dealing with. But yeah, she has been huge in helping me with my custody battle.
she's a powerhouse.
She is. She is. So she was our first guest.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. I told my husband it'd only take an hour, but here we are.
I know. I'm sorry, I've ruined your morning, but
No, you're
thank you.
good.
It was
You're
a good
good. So hey, I'm like sweating. This got like very, very good stuff in here.
I've been waiting this whole time. My cat has been silently having a fit outside, waiting for him to bust the door open and appear right here. Because that's my boss could pick my cat's butthole out of a 10 cat lineup because he's just like, hello, here it is.
That's hilarious. Sometimes I think that's important for things like this. We're so heavy. I had someone tell me that she can't listen to whole episodes because she gets so overwhelmed. And so having that lighthearted balance, I think, is really important.
It is. And I have an absolutely inappropriate sense of humor. So I'm constantly HR checking myself. And I try to be good. I hope I didn't slip here with that in the language because you don't know me very well. I am known for the cussing. And I really rein that in. Because
Yeah.
that's the other thing with the Bible Belt is they get so shocked when you dare cuss at them. I will tell you a story, and I'll let you go. But there is a lawyer here in Springfield called D. Wampler, and he was terrifying. He got if you were rich and a rapist, he was your lawyer.
Yeah.
He argued in court that a girl was damaged goods, a day drinker. He was the worst lawyer ever. And he was a mean son of a bitch. So anyway, he called me one day and I was fighting with a councilwoman and he was trying to get her in as mayor because that would have helped him. And he called and told me to be quiet and to listen to him if I knew what was good for me. I started off by calling him a shit spackled butt plug. By the time I was done with that conversation, he audibly gasped and hung up on me. I made him so sorry. And then after that, he'd have his little Victor Passanisi guy call me, his little whatever that is. And he was terrified. He'd be like, Miss Tyndall, I don't want any trouble. I just want to ask you something. And I was like, are you asking it for D. Wampler? And he's like, yes. I'm like, great. And I just like unload on him. So anyway,
That's
making him so mad.
hilarious.
I
I
wonder if
remember
anyone ever
meeting
called him that.
Yeah, I remember shit spackled. What did you say? Shit
Shit
spackled
spackled butt plug.
plug. I remember when I met Coach Smitty, and he thought that we were doing the speech for domestic violence. Christy Martin was in town, the boxer, and domestic violence survivor, and so helping with that event. And so when I met him, he was like, I'm friends with really powerful people. I know Dee Wampler. And I remember laughing and I was like, why do you think that impresses me? Like, I, ugh.
That was Fulnucky all the way. I mean, they were good friends. And this woman was people who say I only champion women. There was a woman councilwoman who did stuff so bad, bless her heart. I'll just say that. I ran her through the coals for years, to the point where she left town basically and went to Ozark and started doing her business there. And but she was terrible. Every chance she had, I would set shit up. So she had the opportunity to do something nice and look good so people could say I was doing balanced reporting. She would walk a mile out of her way not to do a kind or decent thing. So finally I was like, well, now I'm reporting the truth and went after it. But there aren't many women I've had to fight, but that was an extraordinary one.